The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the grand ballroom of Lady Pembroke's estate, casting long shadows upon the marbled floor where Clara Whitmore stood. 5 seasons had passed since her introduction to society, 5 years of watching others find love while she remained untouched by fortune's fickle hand. At 27, she had grown accustomed to the pitying glances and hushed whispers that followed her like persistent shadows. "Another season begins, and still our gentle observer stands alone," remarked Lady Hartington to her companion, her voice carrying just enough to reach Clara's ears. Such a shame. A pleasant enough countenance, but lacking the necessary vivacity. Clara's fingers instinctively reached for the white camellia pinned to her ivory gown, a tradition she had maintained throughout her years in society. The flower, like herself, possessed a quiet beauty that went largely unnoticed amidst the roses and orchids that adorned the younger debutantes. "You wear that same expression of serene detachment," came the warm voice of Lady Helena Whitmore, approaching with 2 cups of punch. "One might mistake it for contentment were it not for the subtle tension in your shoulders, my dear niece." Clara accepted the beverage with a grateful nod. "I have perfected the art of invisibility, Aunt Helena. Society has been an excellent tutor." The orchestra struck up a lively waltz, and couples swirled across the floor in a dizzying display of silk and laughter. Each rotation seemed to emphasize Clara's stillness, her permanence against the motion of a world that continued without her participation. "The Duke of Elmsworth is expected tonight," Helena remarked, her eyes scanning the crowd. "His return from the continent has set every matchmaking mother aflutter." "Adrian Vale," Clara murmured, the name feeling foreign upon her lips. "The most desired bachelor in London. I believe I've heard his name mentioned in hushed tones approximately 834 times this week alone." Helena's laughter was like the tinkling of silver bells. "Your countenance may be solemn, but your wit remains undiminished. Perhaps that is what the right gentleman shall notice." "The right gentleman would need extraordinary vision indeed," Clara replied, "to see what 5 years of society has deemed unworthy of attention." A sudden hush fell over the assembly, rippling through the crowd like a wave. The music faltered momentarily as heads turned toward the grand entrance. Standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the corridor beyond, was the Duke of Elmsworth. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to command, his steps measured and deliberate. His dark hair was slightly longer than fashion dictated, framing a face sculpted by both privilege and hardship. The scar at his temple, a reminder of his service in the Crimea, only enhanced the severity of his features. "They say he has not smiled since his return," Helena whispered. Clara observed him dispassionately. "Perhaps he has found little worth smiling for." The Duke progressed through the room, acknowledging greetings with the barest inclination of his head. Society parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses, eager yet intimidated. When Lady Pembroke introduced him to her daughter, a pretty golden-haired creature of 19, he bowed with perfect correctness, but his eyes remained distant. As the night progressed, Clara retreated further into the shadows, content to watch the familiar dance of ambition and desire. She slipped away to the terrace, seeking respite from the suffocating warmth of the ballroom. The night air caressed her flushed cheeks, and she unpinned the camellia from her bodice, twirling it between her fingers. "Another year of silence," she whispered to the flower. "Another season of invisibility." She did not hear the footsteps behind her until a deep voice spoke. "Is invisibility a condition one chooses, or one that is thrust upon them?" Clara turned, startled to find the Duke of Elmsworth standing mere feet away, his grey eyes studying her with unexpected intensity. The camellia slipped from her fingers, falling to the stone terrace. Before she could respond, he stepped forward and retrieved the blossom. Instead of returning it, he examined it in the moonlight. "The Camellia japonica," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "A flower of perfect form yet subtle fragrance, often overlooked in favor of more ostentatious blooms." "You seem remarkably well versed in botany, Your Grace," Clara replied, finding her voice at last. "I find that understanding the nature of things overlooked often yields the most profound revelations." He extended the flower toward her. "Your name, madam?" "Clara Whitmore," she answered, accepting the camellia with trembling fingers. "Miss Whitmore," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "Why do you stand in shadows when the ballroom beckons?" A footman appeared at the terrace doorway. "Your Grace, Lady Pembroke requests your presence for the supper dance." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Inform her ladyship I shall attend momentarily." He turned back to Clara, his expression inscrutable. "It seems duty calls, Miss Whitmore." "Duty always does, Your Grace." As he moved to depart, he paused. The invisible are often the most perceptive observers, are they not? With a slight bow, he was gone, leaving Clara clutching her camellia. Her heart beating a rhythm unfamiliar after 5 years of resignation. She watched through the glass doors as he rejoined the assembly, immediately surrounded by eager admirers. A crack of thunder sounded in the distance. The camellia trembled in her hand. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Clara's bedroom, casting delicate patterns across the pages of her journal. Her pen hovered above the paper, ink suspended in momentary indecision. 5 years of careful observations had filled these leather-bound volumes, the patterns of society, the quiet betrayals, the silent devastations. Yet now, she found herself unable to capture the previous evening's encounter in words. "Are you transcribing your usual social obituaries?" Margaret asked, entering without ceremony. At 20, Clara's sister possessed all the spirited optimism that Clara herself had gradually relinquished to time and disappointment. "I am attempting to," Clara replied, closing the journal with gentle precision, "though I find my thoughts unexpectedly disordered this morning." Margaret's eyes brightened with mischievous interest. "Does this disorder perhaps relate to a certain ducal figure who, Lady Helena tells me, sought your company on the terrace?" "Aunt Helena's powers of observation remain undiminished," Clara observed dryly. "It was a momentary exchange, nothing more. The Duke of Elmsworth simply happened upon my solitude." "The Duke of Elmsworth does nothing by mere happenstance," Margaret declared, seating herself at the edge of Clara's bed. "They say he calculates each move with military precision." Clara rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where spring had begun to assert itself, despite London's perpetual greyness. "Then I must have been a most disappointing tactical maneuver. Our exchange barely lasted 2 minutes before duty reclaimed him." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew their attention. Through the window they observed a sleek black curricle halting before their modest townhouse. The driver, clad in the distinctive livery of the Elmsworth estate, descended with a small parcel. "It appears we have a delivery," Margaret remarked, her curiosity evident. Moments later the maid appeared with a small box wrapped in silver paper. "For Miss Clara Whitmore," she announced, presenting it with wide-eyed wonder. "From Elmsworth House, miss." Clara accepted the package with outward composure that belied her inner disquiet. Under Margaret's eager gaze, she unwrapped the parcel to reveal a delicate silver bookmark, fashioned in the shape of a camellia blossom. A small note accompanied it, written in a bold, decisive hand. "For the Observer, whose chronicles I suspect are more illuminating than most published histories, a marker for thoughts worth revisiting. A.V. He knows you keep journals," Margaret breathed, astonishment widening her eyes. "How could he possibly—" "He deduced it," Clara replied softly. "A simple observation from a man who evidently notices that which others overlook." The morning paper arrived with their breakfast, and Helena's exclamation drew their attention. "Good heavens! It seems the Duke of Elmsworth has captured more than your attention, Clara." The society pages are alight with speculation regarding his unexpected interest in the unassuming Miss Whitmore, whose 5 seasons of quiet dignity have at last attracted discerning notice. Clara's teacup clattered against its saucer. What absurdity! A momentary conversation and a courteous gift do not constitute interest. "The ton shall decide what constitutes interest, my dear," Helena replied, scanning the column. "And apparently, the Duke's exclusive attention to a woman beyond her first bloom of youth is deemed most intriguing indeed." Clara's cheeks flamed. "This is precisely what I have avoided for 5 years, becoming the subject of idle speculation." "Better to be speculated about than forgotten," Margaret observed pragmatically. The clock in the hall chimed 11, and Helena rose with purpose. "We have an invitation to Lady Harrington's garden party this afternoon. Given this morning's news, I expect our presence will be rather more noticed than usual." Clara's protest died on her lips as a second carriage approached their residence. This one bore the crest of Lysander Rowe, a gentleman whose reputation for malicious gossip preceded him wherever he travelled. "Curious timing," Helena murmured, her expression darkening. The caller was announced moments later, and Rowe entered the drawing-room with calculated languor. His once handsome features had been sharpened by bitterness, and the scar on his chin seemed to twitch with suppressed emotion. "Ladies Whitmore," he greeted them, bowing with exaggerated formality. "I find myself compelled to pay my respects after reading the most fascinating account in this morning's papers. Your concern for our family's social standing is touching, Mr. Rowe," Helena replied coolly, "particularly given the infrequency of your previous attentions." Rowe's smile did not reach his eyes. The Duke of Elmsworth's sudden interest in Miss Clara naturally piqued my curiosity. He and I are old acquaintances. Acquaintances, Clara repeated, noting the tension in his jaw. I suspect that term inadequately describes your association. His gaze sharpened. Perceptive, aren't you? Indeed, the Duke and I share a history that few are privileged to understand. I merely wish to offer my guidance as you navigate this unexpected attention. Your guidance seems precipitous, sir, Clara observed. The Duke merely retrieved a fallen flower and engaged in momentary conversation. Rose's laugh held no warmth. My dear Miss Whitmore, when a man like Adrian Vale retrieves a fallen anything, one must question the calculation behind such apparent gallantry. He moved toward the door, then paused. I would caution you against mistaking tactical interest for genuine regard. The Duke's affairs, both military and personal, are seldom what they appear to be. After Rose's departure, an uneasy silence descended upon the drawing-room. I mislike his sudden appearance, Helena declared, her normally cheerful countenance grave. Lysander Rowe harbors old grudges like precious jewels. Clara touched the silver camellia bookmark, its petals cool against her fingertips. Whatever history exists between them is no concern of mine. This morning's delivery shall be acknowledged with proper gratitude, and then, she placed the bookmark firmly between the pages of her journal, we shall return to our accustomed quietude. Margaret's laugh was gentle but knowing. Dearest Clara, I fear quietude has already departed our door. The question is what shall enter in its place. The clock struck the half-hour. Lady Harrington's garden party awaited, and with it the curious gazes of a society that had suddenly discovered Clara Whitmore existed. She pinned a fresh white camellia to her walking dress, straightened her shoulders, and reached for her gloves. The knock came at the door. 3 times. Lady Harrington's garden bloomed with both flowers and speculation. As Clara entered alongside Helena and Margaret, the customary murmur of conversation faltered briefly before resuming with renewed vigor. Ladies leaned toward one another behind raised fans, and gentlemen adjusted their spectacles for a better view of the woman who had supposedly caught the Duke's attention. Courage, my dear, Helena whispered, patting Clara's gloved hand. Remember that you have weathered far worse than curious stares. Indeed, Clara replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. 5 years of invisibility have prepared me admirably for unwanted visibility. They were intercepted almost immediately by Lady Harrington herself, a woman whose enthusiasm for gossip was matched only by her genuine warmth. My dear Miss Whitmore, how delightful that you could attend. You must tell me everything about your encounter with the Duke of Elmsworth. The entire ton speaks of nothing else. Clara summoned a polite smile. I fear there is precious little to tell, Lady Harrington. His Grace was merely exercising common courtesy toward a fellow guest. Common courtesy. Nonsense, child. When a man like the Duke of Elmsworth notices a woman, particularly one who has, forgive me, remained on the periphery of society's attention, it signifies something of consequence. The older woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. They say he has not shown particular interest in any lady since his return from the Crimea. His behavior at Lady Pembroke's gathering was most unprecedented. Perhaps His Grace was simply fatigued by the constant press of eager debutantes, Clara suggested gently. Lady Harrington laughed with genuine delight. Oh, my dear Miss Whitmore, your modesty is as refreshing as it is anachronistic. Come, you must meet Lady Pembroke's daughter, Sophia. The poor girl is most distraught that the Duke barely acknowledged her, despite her mother's machinations. As Lady Harrington guided them through the garden, Clara became acutely aware of the social currents shifting around her. Matrons who had previously offered only perfunctory greetings now smiled with calculated warmth. Young ladies who had ignored her existence now scrutinized her appearance with undisguised curiosity. Miss Whitmore, called a melodious voice. Clara turned to find Sophia Pembroke approaching, her golden curls bouncing with each determined step. Despite Lady Harrington's warning of distress, the girl's expression held only frank interest. Miss Pembroke, Clara acknowledged with a slight curtsy. You must forgive my directness, Sophia began, but I simply must know. Did the Duke of Elmsworth truly say that you possess the most intelligent eyes in London? Everyone insists that he remarked upon it to Lord Kensington, but I can scarcely believe he would express himself so openly. Clara blinked in surprise. I assure you, Miss Pembroke, if His Grace made such a comment, it was not in my presence, nor with my knowledge. Sophia's disappointment was palpable. How vexing. The stories grow more elaborate by the hour. She sighed dramatically. I had so hoped that at least one might be true, for it would suggest that the Duke is capable of romantic sentiments after all. The afternoon progressed in similar fashion, with Clara repeatedly deflecting increasingly fantastical rumors about her supposed relationship with the Duke. By the time they settled beneath a white-blossomed cherry tree for refreshments, she felt emotionally exhausted. "You are developing admirable diplomatic skills," Helena observed, passing her a cup of tea. "Necessity is proving an excellent tutor," Clara replied, "though I confess I fail to understand how a 2-minute exchange on a terrace could generate such elaborate fabrications." "Society craves narrative," came a deep voice from behind them, "particularly when it concerns those who defy easy categorization." Clara turned to find Edward Linton approaching, his kind face wreathed in a gentle smile. As the Duke of Elmsworth's closest friend and confidant, his appearance seemed suspiciously timely. "Mr. Linton," Helena greeted him warmly. "What a pleasant surprise." He bowed with casual elegance. "Lady Helena, Miss Margaret, Miss Whitmore, I hope I find you well despite the rather oppressive attention you seem to be receiving." "We endure, sir," Clara replied evenly, "though I confess your arrival seems fortuitously timed to fuel further speculation." Edward's laugh was genuine. "Forgive me. I come not as an agent of gossip, but as its potential remedy." He lowered his voice. "Adrian, that is the Duke, is most distressed by the attention his simple gesture has brought upon you. He wishes to express his sincere apologies." Clara's fingers tightened around her teacup. "No apology is necessary, Mr. Linton. Neither His Grace nor I could have anticipated society's reaction. Nevertheless, he feels responsible." Edward glanced around the garden, then added, "He would like to explain himself, if you would permit it. He suggests the Natural History Museum tomorrow at 11, a public venue, yet one where meaningful conversation might occur without undue scrutiny." Helena interjected smoothly, "Such an arrangement would require a chaperone, naturally." "Naturally," Edward agreed. The Duke anticipated as much and suggested that I might accompany my wife, who expressed interest in viewing the new ornithological exhibit. We would be honored to provide appropriate companionship. Clara's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. Prudence dictated a polite refusal. Curiosity urged acceptance. Before she could formulate a response, a familiar and unwelcome figure appeared beside their gathering. "Mr. Linton," Lysander Rowe drawled, his expression one of calculated surprise. "How interesting to find you in such charming company. One might almost suspect you of conducting the Duke's preliminary negotiations." Edward's posture stiffened, though his voice remained level. "Mr. Rowe, I was unaware you had been invited to Lady Harrington's gathering." "Lady Harrington and I share certain mutual interests," Rowe replied, his gaze sliding to Clara. "Primarily, the welfare of those who might find themselves unwittingly entangled in matters beyond their understanding." "Your concern for Miss Whitmore's welfare is noted," Edward replied coolly, "though perhaps misplaced." Rowe's smile was sharp as a blade. "Is it? I wonder if Miss Whitmore knows the full extent of the Duke's history, or his true reasons for suddenly noticing a woman whom society has overlooked for 5 seasons. "Mr. Rowe," Clara interjected, her voice quiet but firm, "whatever past grievances exist between yourself and the Duke of Elmsworth, I have no desire to be used as an instrument in their resolution." Rowe regarded her with newfound interest. "Backbone, as well as beauty. Perhaps Adrian's taste has improved after all." He bowed slightly. "I shall leave you to your deliberations, Miss Whitmore, but remember, every choice the Duke makes serves a purpose beyond the obvious." As Rowe departed, Edward released a tense breath. "I must apologize for that unpleasant interlude. Lysander Rowe has harbored resentment toward Adrian since a financial matter some years ago. His presence here is no coincidence." Clara studied Edward's earnest face. "Tell me truthfully, Mr. Linton, is there substance to his insinuations? Does the Duke's interest in me serve some ulterior purpose?" Edward hesitated, choosing his words with evident care. "The Duke's actions are his own to explain, Miss Whitmore. I can only affirm that his character is one of profound integrity, despite what Rowe would have you believe." Clara considered this, then made her decision. "Please inform His Grace that I shall meet him tomorrow at the appointed time, with you and Mrs. Linton as chaperones." "Clara," Margaret exclaimed, unable to contain her excitement. "It is merely a conversation, Margaret," Clara cautioned. "An opportunity to clarify matters and perhaps put an end to this unwelcome attention." As Edward took his leave, promising to convey her acceptance, Helena studied her niece with knowing eyes. "You have spent 5 years observing, Clara. Now, it seems, you shall be observed in return." Clara touched the white camellia at her bodice. Perhaps it is time to discover whether I can withstand such scrutiny. The petals of the cherry blossoms drifted down around them, white as snow against the green lawn. One landed on Clara's open palm, delicate and ephemeral. A portent, perhaps. But of what, she could not yet discern. The Natural History Museum stood as a cathedral to scientific discovery, its vaulted ceilings and columned hallways lending gravity to human curiosity. Clara arrived precisely at 11, accompanied by Edward Linton and his wife Frances, a woman whose intelligent eyes and forthright manner immediately put Clara at ease. "The Duke awaits us in the Gallery of Birds," Edward explained, offering his arm to his wife while Clara followed slightly behind. "He thought it might provide both privacy and sufficient openness for propriety's sake." Clara nodded, conscious of the quickening of her pulse. She had chosen her attire with deliberate care, a walking dress of sage green, adorned with minimal embellishments. The inevitable white camellia was pinned at her throat, a small act of continuity in a week of unexpected disruptions. They found the Duke standing before a display of hummingbirds, his tall frame unmistakable even from a distance. He turned at their approach, and Clara was struck by the transformation in his countenance. The severe lines of his face had softened somewhat, though his eyes remained watchful. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted her, bowing with formal correctness. "I am grateful for your willingness to meet, despite the unfortunate speculation my attention has generated." "Your Grace," she acknowledged with a curtsy, "I confess myself curious as to your purpose in arranging this encounter." Adrian exchanged a brief glance with Edward, who smoothly suggested, "Frances, my dear, shall we examine the tropical specimens? I believe they are just beyond that archway." Frances, understanding the unspoken request, smiled warmly. "We shall remain within sight, but beyond earshot," she assured Clara. "Sometimes private conversation requires public settings." As the Lintons moved a discreet distance away, the Duke gestured toward a bench positioned between two glass cases. "May we sit, Miss Whitmore? What I wish to discuss may require some explanation." Clara settled herself on the bench, arranging her skirts with precise movements that concealed her inner agitation. "I have been the subject of more conjecture in the past 2 days than in the previous 5 years combined, Your Grace. I should appreciate some illumination as to why." The Duke's mouth curved in what might almost be termed a smile. "Direct and forthright. Edward suggested as much about your character." "You have discussed me with Mr. Linton?" Clara asked, unsure whether to be flattered or discomfited. "I sought his counsel," Adrian admitted, "when I realized my impulsive gesture had subjected you to unwelcome scrutiny." He paused, his grey eyes meeting hers with unexpected earnestness. "The camellia you wear, it has significance beyond mere decoration, does it not?" Clara's hand rose involuntarily to the blossom at her throat. "You are remarkably observant, Your Grace. Observation is a habit cultivated by necessity," he replied. 5 years ago, during my first leave from the Crimea, I attended Lady Montrose's midsummer ball. Among the debutantes was a young woman who stood apart from the giddy throng. She wore a white camellia and observed the proceedings with such quiet intelligence that I found myself watching her, instead of participating in the expected social rituals. Clara's breath caught. "You remember that evening?" "I remember the observer," he corrected gently, "though I did not know your name then. When circumstance and injury returned me to the battlefield, I carried that image with me, a reminder of the civility and thoughtfulness that seemed so absent in war." He shifted slightly, his posture betraying a hint of discomfort with such personal disclosure. "Upon my final return to London, I discovered that the same observer remained at the periphery of society, still watching, still adorned with a white camellia. 5 seasons had passed, yet you maintained a dignity that many lose after a single unsuccessful season." Clara found herself momentarily speechless, struggling to reconcile this revelation with her long-held belief in her own invisibility. "You noticed me 5 years ago," she finally managed, "yet only now choose to acknowledge it." "I noticed you," he confirmed, "but was in no position to act upon that notice. War changes a man, Miss Whitmore. I returned from the Crimea with more than physical scars. It has taken considerable time to reclaim certain aspects of myself." A group of chattering schoolboys passed through the gallery, their exuberance creating a momentary bubble of normalcy around Clara's extraordinary conversation. "You have not explained why you chose to approach me now," she observed when quiet had returned. The Duke's expression grew more guarded. "Recent events have clarified certain priorities. Seeing you again, still observing, still apart, it struck me as a waste of rare qualities." Qualities that 5 years of society has largely deemed unremarkable, Clara noted without self-pity. Society, the Duke replied with unexpected vehemence, frequently fails to recognize value that does not announce itself with trumpets and spectacle. A commotion at the gallery entrance drew their attention. Lysander Rowe stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping the room until it fixed upon them with predatory focus. "It appears we have acquired an audience," Clara murmured. The Duke's jaw tightened. Rowe's appearance is no coincidence. His vendetta against me has apparently found a new avenue of expression. "Through me," Clara surmised, "Mr. Linton alluded to some financial dispute between you." "A simplified description of a complex situation," Adrian replied, his voice lowered. "Suffice it to say that Rowe engaged in certain dishonorable financial practices that I was obligated to expose. His subsequent ruin was of his own making, though he places the blame squarely upon my shoulders." Rowe began moving toward them with deliberate slowness, acknowledging acquaintances as he progressed through the gallery. "Miss Whitmore," the Duke said urgently, "I must ask something of you that may seem peculiar given our limited acquaintance." "Yes?" she prompted when he hesitated. "Allow me to call upon you properly. Permit me to seek your company at appropriate social functions. In short, grant me the opportunity to discover whether my long-held impression of your character bears scrutiny in closer proximity." Clara regarded him with astonishment. "You are proposing a courtship." "I am proposing a mutual investigation," he corrected, "conducted with appropriate decorum and chaperoning." Rowe had nearly reached them, his malicious smile visible even at a distance. "Your answer, Miss Whitmore. I fear circumstances compel urgency." Clara made her decision as Rowe approached. "Yes, Your Grace. I accept your investigative proposal." The relief in Adrian's eyes was palpable. He rose as Rowe reached them, positioning himself slightly before Clara in a gesture both protective and proprietary. "Rowe," he acknowledged coldly. "Your Grace," Rowe replied with exaggerated deference. "How fortuitous to encounter you in such educational surroundings. And Miss Whitmore as well. My, the gossips shall be positively ecstatic." "Mr. Rowe," Clara greeted him with polite neutrality. Rowe's gaze shifted between them, calculating. "I was just remarking to Lady Harrington yesterday how remarkable it is that the Duke should suddenly discover an interest in a lady who has graced our assemblies for 5 years without capturing his attention, almost as if some recent development had rendered her strategically valuable." The Duke's posture stiffened, but his voice remained controlled. "Your insinuations grow tiresome, Rowe. Miss Whitmore has kindly consented to allow me to call upon her. Beyond that, our arrangements are not subject to your speculation or approval." Edward and Francis Linton returned to the group, their timely reappearance creating a buffer of civility. "Mr. Rowe?" Francis greeted him with perfect politeness that nonetheless conveyed distinct coolness. "Are you an enthusiast of ornithology? I hadn't realized you possessed scientific interests." Rowe's mouth twisted. "My interests are varied, Mrs. Linton, and frequently misunderstood. Much like the Duke's, it seems." He bowed with theatrical precision. "I shall leave you to your educational pursuits. Miss Whitmore, do remember my caution about matters beyond your understanding. Some lessons come at devastating cost." As he departed, Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man grows more intolerable with each encounter," Edward muttered. The Duke turned to Clara, concern evident in his expression. "I must apologize for subjecting you to his malice. Perhaps this arrangement was ill-considered." "On the contrary," Clara replied with newfound resolve. "Mr. Rowe's opposition serves only to strengthen my curiosity about this investigation we have agreed to undertake." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. "Then we proceed, Miss Whitmore." "We proceed, Your Grace," she confirmed, "though I suspect neither of us fully comprehends where this path may lead." The glass cases of preserved birds surrounded them, once living creatures now frozen in eternal, silent observation. Clara could not help but feel a certain kinship with them, wondering if she too was about to be transformed from observer to observed. The museum clock struck noon, its resonant chime echoing through the vaulted gallery. The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of carefully orchestrated encounters. The Duke called upon Clara with impeccable regularity, never too frequently to appear eager, never seldom enough to suggest indifference. They met in drawing rooms under Helena's watchful eye, exchanged observations at musical evenings, and walked in public parks with Margaret trailing at a discreet distance. Society watched with avid interest as the most eligible bachelor in London deliberately cultivated the acquaintance of a woman they had long dismissed. Speculation ran rampant, theories proliferating with each public appearance. They say it is a wager, Margaret reported one evening, returning from a literary salon. Lord Pembroke insists the Duke accepted a challenge to transform this season's least likely matrimonial prospect into the most envied. Clara, seated at her writing desk, continued her journal entry without pausing. "And do you believe such nonsense?" "Of course not," Margaret replied indignantly. "I have seen how he looks at you when he believes himself unobserved. There is nothing of the gambler in that gaze, only genuine interest." Clara set down her pen, turning to face her sister. "What troubles me is not the speculation, but my own uncertainty. After 5 weeks of regular association, I find the Duke remains largely inscrutable. He speaks with eloquence on matters intellectual and cultural, yet reveals precious little of himself. Perhaps that is the nature of men who have seen war," Helena suggested, looking up from her embroidery. "Your father was similarly reticent after returning from the peninsula." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. The maid entered bearing a silver salver with a letter sealed with the Elmsworth crest. "From His Grace, miss," she announced, presenting it to Clara. The heavy vellum crackled beneath Clara's fingers as she broke the seal. Inside, she found a brief note in the Duke's bold handwriting. "Tomorrow at 3, the Portrait Gallery. The matter is of some urgency. A.V." "How mysteriously terse," Margaret observed, reading over Clara's shoulder. "What do you suppose has transpired?" "I cannot begin to guess," Clara replied, folding the note carefully, "though I note he has abandoned his usual formality in favor of expediency." The following day found Clara at the National Portrait Gallery precisely at 3, accompanied by Helena, whose curiosity had overcome her usual preference for afternoon rest. The Duke awaited them in the hall, dedicated to military heroes, his expression grave. "Miss Whitmore, Lady Helena," he greeted them with a bow. "I appreciate your prompt response to my rather abrupt summons." "Your note suggested urgency, Your Grace," Clara replied, studying his face for clues to his disquiet. "Indeed." He glanced around the gallery, which was mercifully uncrowded on this rainy afternoon. "May we walk? What I must discuss requires movement rather than stationary conversation." As they proceeded slowly through the gallery, the Duke explained, "I have received intelligence that Lysander Rowe has begun spreading certain insinuations regarding the nature of our association." "Such gossip seems inevitable," Clara observed. "We have provided ample fodder for speculation." "These are not mere idle conjectures," Adrian clarified, his voice lowered despite the absence of other visitors in their vicinity. "Rowe has apparently suggested to several influential members of the Ton that your family is in possession of certain documents relating to my military service, documents that might prove embarrassing if revealed." Clara halted abruptly. "What? That is absurd. We possess nothing of the sort." "Of course you don't," the Duke agreed, "but Rowe's insinuation serves two purposes. It casts doubt on your family's integrity and suggests that my interest in you is merely an attempt to recover these non-existent papers." Helena's expression darkened. "The man is truly despicable. To fabricate such malicious falsehoods, it is his standard strategy," Adrian interrupted grimly. "Create doubt, encourage suspicion, and watch as society's predilection for scandal does the rest." They paused before a portrait of a stern-faced general, his chest adorned with medals. The Duke regarded it with a distant expression before continuing. "I fear I have placed you in an untenable position, Miss Whitmore. My attention," meant as sincere appreciation, "has exposed you to malicious conjecture." Clara considered this, her mind working rapidly. "These alleged documents, what is their supposed nature?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "Rowe claims they detail certain decisions made during the Crimean campaign that resulted in unnecessary casualties. He suggests I acted dishonorably, and that evidence of this was somehow transmitted to your family." "Why would such documents come to us?" Helena inquired skeptically. "Therein lies the cleverness of his fabrication," Adrian replied. "Your late brother, Colonel Whitmore, served in the Crimea. Rowe suggests he was witness to my alleged misconduct and preserved evidence before his death." Clara's breath caught. The mention of her beloved brother, dead these 6 years, struck a painful chord. James would never have participated in dishonorable accusations. He spoke of you with great respect in his letters home. Something shifted in the Duke's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or relief. "You received letters mentioning me." "Several," Clara confirmed. "James wrote that you were one of the few officers who treated the enlisted men with genuine concern for their welfare." Adrian's shoulders relaxed slightly. Your brother was an exceptional officer and gentleman. His commendation means more than you might realize. Helena, ever practical, redirected the conversation. How do you propose to address Roe's slander, Your Grace? Directly, he replied with grim determination. I have requested an audience with Lord Palmerston himself to clarify certain aspects of my service record. As former Secretary of War, his word carries sufficient weight to counter Roe's innuendos. Clara studied him thoughtfully. Such a step seems extreme for mere gossip. It is not the gossip that concerns me, Adrian said quietly, but the potential damage to your reputation. You have maintained 5 years of impeccable dignity. I will not be the instrument of its destruction. The sincerity in his voice stirred something within Clara, an unfamiliar warmth that both comforted and disquieted her. Your concern is commendable, Your Grace, but perhaps premature. Rumors require fertile ground to flourish. If we continue our association with transparent propriety, Roe's seeds of doubt may find no purchase. A sensible approach, Helena agreed, though I wonder if more decisive action might be warranted. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on Clara. What would you suggest, Miss Whitmore? Clara considered for a moment, then replied with newfound boldness, perhaps instead of retreating from Roe's challenge, we might advance to meet it. The Countess of Montrose's annual midsummer ball approaches, the very event where you first observed me 5 years ago. Let us attend together openly and without apology. Such a public appearance would certainly make a statement, Helena mused. Indeed, Adrian agreed, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes, though it would irrevocably alter the nature of our investigation. Our investigation, Clara replied evenly, has already progressed beyond its initial parameters, has it not? We may as well acknowledge what society has already concluded. A subtle tension seemed to leave the Duke's frame. Very well, Miss Whitmore. The Countess's ball it shall be. As they continued their circuit of the gallery, Clara became aware of a subtle shift in their relationship, a new current of understanding that flowed beneath their formal exchange. The Duke walked slightly closer to her than propriety strictly dictated, his hand occasionally brushing against hers as they moved from portrait to portrait. Near the gallery's exit, they encountered an unexpected figure, Edward Linton, whose expression brightened at the sight of them. Adrian, Miss Whitmore, Lady Helena, what fortuitous timing! He approached with quick steps. I was just coming to find you. What has occurred? The Duke asked, instantly alert. Edward glanced around before lowering his voice. Roe was seen entering Lord Thornfield's study an hour ago. They emerged looking most satisfied with whatever transpired behind closed doors. Adrian's expression darkened. Thornfield sits on the Military Honours Committee. Precisely, Edward confirmed grimly. Clara looked between the two men, comprehension dawning. He seeks to undermine your military reputation formally. So it would appear, the Duke agreed. The web tightens. Helena laid a reassuring hand on Clara's arm. Perhaps we should return home, my dear. This seems a matter requiring gentlemen's discussion. Clara hesitated, reluctant to be dismissed from a conversation that so directly involved her future. To her surprise, the Duke intervened. If Miss Whitmore wishes to remain, I believe she has earned that right. Her insight may prove valuable. Thank you, Your Grace, Clara replied, touched by his respect for her judgment. Edward's eyebrows rose slightly, but he continued without comment. There is more. Francis attended Lady Pembroke's morning call and overheard something most disturbing. Apparently, Roe has begun suggesting that the Whitmore family's modest circumstances might be alleviated through strategic revelations. He implies we would sell these fictional documents, Clara asked, indignation coloring her voice. Precisely, Edward confirmed. A most insidious suggestion, as it plays upon society's awareness of your father's financial reversals before his passing. The Duke's expression hardened into something Clara had not witnessed before, cold, implacable anger that transformed his handsome features into a mask of barely restrained fury. This has progressed beyond acceptable bounds. Roe has made this personal in ways he shall come to regret. Adrian, Edward cautioned, remember your position. Impulsive action now could what? The Duke interrupted. Damage my reputation. It appears that objective is already in progress. He turned to Clara, his gaze softening. Miss Whitmore, I must ask once more if you wish to reconsider our association. The path grows increasingly treacherous. Clara met his gaze steadily. I have spent 5 years in safe obscurity, Your Grace. If danger is the price of living more fully, perhaps it is time I paid it. Something indefinable passed between them. A recognition, a promise, a possibility. Edward cleared his throat discreetly. The rain has stopped. Perhaps we might continue this discussion while walking. These walls have developed remarkable acoustical properties of late. As they departed the gallery, Clara felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. Whether friend or foe observed their exit, she could not tell, but the sensation of being watched had become disquietingly familiar. The camellia at her throat seemed suddenly heavier, as if its petals had absorbed the weight of unspoken words and gathering storms. The Countess of Montrose's ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished silver, a firmament of artificial stars suspended above the elite of London society. Clara stood at the entrance, her hand resting lightly upon the Duke of Elmsworth's arm, acutely conscious of the hush that fell upon the assembled guests as they were announced. His Grace, the Duke of Elmsworth, and Miss Clara Whitmore, the footman intoned, his voice carrying across the momentarily silent room. Clara wore ivory satin, a deliberate echo of the gown she had worn 5 years earlier when the Duke had first noticed her. The white camellia at her bodice was complemented by smaller blossoms woven into her elegantly arranged hair. Helena had insisted upon this more elaborate styling, arguing that if Clara were to step definitively from the shadows, she should do so with appropriate splendor. "Remember to breathe," Adrian murmured, his lips barely moving as they descended the shallow steps into the ballroom. "Society's regard is like a summer storm, intense but fleeting. I find myself less concerned with their regard than with their speculation," Clara replied quietly. "Every eye seeks confirmation of Roe's malicious fabrications. Then let us provide them with a different narrative entirely." The Duke guided her through the crowd with consummate skill, acknowledging greetings with polite nods while maintaining a deliberate progress toward the Countess of Montrose. The elderly patroness observed their approach with bright, curious eyes that belied her advanced years. "Your Grace," she greeted the Duke with genuine warmth. "How delightful to see you emerging from your self-imposed exile. And Miss Whitmore, what a pleasure to welcome you again. I believe you have attended my midsummer ball for 5 consecutive years, have you not?" "Indeed, your ladyship," Clara replied with a respectful curtsy. "Your hospitality has been a constant delight. And yet," the Countess observed shrewdly, "this is the first year you have arrived on the arm of a duke. How fascinating the workings of fate." Adrian's expression remained composed. "Not fate, Lady Montrose, but belated recognition. Miss Whitmore's qualities have remained constant. It was my perception that required adjustment." The Countess's eyes widened slightly at this unusually candid statement. "Well, that is refreshingly direct, Your Grace. One might almost suspect you of developing romantic sensibilities in your maturity." "One might suspect many things," the Duke replied smoothly. "I have learned that perception and reality often maintain only a nodding acquaintance." The orchestra struck up a waltz and Adrian turned to Clara. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Whitmore?" "With pleasure, Your Grace." As he led her onto the dance floor, Clara became acutely aware of the avid attention directed toward them. "We have become the evening's entertainment," she observed, keeping her expression serene despite her discomfort. "Let them watch," Adrian replied, his hand firm at her waist as they began the waltz. "What they will see is nothing more or less than the truth, a gentleman dancing with a lady he admires." The simplicity of his statement caught Clara by surprise. "Is that what this is, Your Grace? Admiration?" His grey eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. "It began as admiration, certainly. What it has become," he hesitated, then continued with careful precision, "I find myself increasingly reluctant to define within conventional parameters." The waltz carried them in sweeping circles around the floor, their movements synchronized with a harmony that belied their relatively brief acquaintance. Clara discovered an unexpected freedom in being the focus of attention, as if, having accepted visibility, she might now define its nature rather than merely endure it. "Your brother," Adrian said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "In his letters, did he mention the Battle of Inkerman?" The abrupt change of subject startled her. "Yes, though not in great detail. He wrote that the fog was so thick that men could scarcely see their own hands before their faces." Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a subtle relaxation, as if a private concern had been alleviated. "And did he mention my actions during that engagement?" "He wrote that you led your men with exceptional courage," Clara replied, remembering her brother's words with perfect clarity. "That when communication broke down between units, you personally crossed exposed ground to coordinate the defense." Adrian's steps faltered almost imperceptibly before he recovered the rhythm of the dance. "Your brother was most generous in his assessment." "James was never generous with unearned praise," Clara countered. "If he commended your conduct, It was because he deemed it worthy of commendation. The music swelled around them, creating a momentary bubble of privacy within the public spectacle. Adrian drew her slightly closer than strict propriety dictated, not enough to cause scandal but sufficient to convey intimacy. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "I begin to suspect that your 5 years of observation have yielded insights that might illuminate certain shadows I have long avoided confronting." Before Clara could respond to this cryptic statement, the waltz concluded. As they exited the dance floor, they were intercepted by Edward and Francis Linton, whose expressions conveyed barely contained excitement. "A magnificent display," Francis declared, linking her arm through Clara's. "You dance together as if you have been partners for years rather than weeks." "Francis," Edward cautioned, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "Discretion, my dear." "Oh, nonsense," his wife replied cheerfully. "Half the ballroom is already composing wedding announcements in their minds. I merely state aloud what everyone thinks privately." Clara felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Mrs. Linton, you mustn't—" "Must I not?" Francis interrupted with a conspiratorial smile. "Well then, I shall restrict my observations to matters less controversial. For instance, have you noticed that Lysander Rowe appears to be engaged in most intense conversation with Lord Thornfield near the refreshment table?" All levity vanished from Adrian's expression. "Recently? Within the last 10 minutes, Edward confirmed, and they were joined briefly by Sir William Blackwood. The Duke's jaw tightened. The military attaché to the Foreign Office. This grows more deliberate by the hour. Clara glanced toward the refreshment table, where Rowe now stood alone watching their group with undisguised interest. When their eyes met, he raised his glass in a mocking salute. "He wishes us to know he is acting against you," she observed. "This is not merely vengeance but performance." "Astutely noted," Adrian agreed. Rowe always possessed a theatrical streak. His humiliation must be as public as his accusations. Edward frowned. "Surely you don't intend to confront him here?" "Not confrontation," the Duke replied thoughtfully. "Counter-narrative." He turned to Clara. "Would you accompany me to the terrace? The night air might provide welcome respite from the ballroom's heat." Understanding that more than comfort motivated his request, Clara nodded. "Of course, Your Grace." Francis, comprehending the situation with admirable quickness, offered, "Edward and I shall join you." A proper quartet for enjoying the evening breeze. The terrace overlooked the Countess's immaculate gardens, now silvered by moonlight. Several other guests had sought the cooler air, creating sufficient company for propriety while allowing relative privacy for conversation. "Rowe is consolidating allies," Adrian began without preamble. "Thornfield controls military honors, while Blackwood has access to War Office correspondence. Together they could construct a persuasive case regarding my conduct at Inkerman, despite having no direct knowledge of the engagement." "But surely there must be other officers who could testify to your actions," Clara suggested. "Few who witnessed my direct orders survive," the Duke replied grimly. "The fog, the chaos, it was a soldier's battle, fought in fragments and confusion." Edward's expression was troubled. "Adrian, perhaps it is time to reveal the full circumstances." "The dispatches—" "No!" the Duke interrupted sharply. "That remains inadmissible." Clara looked between the two men, sensing a deeper current of understanding that excluded her. "What dispatches?" Adrian hesitated, then sighed. "Miss Whitmore, there are aspects of this situation that I have not disclosed, not from lack of trust, but from professional obligation." "Military secrets," she surmised. "Of a sort," he acknowledged. "Suffice it to say that certain orders were issued before Inkerman that proved catastrophically ill-conceived. I countermanded those orders, without explicit authorization to do so." "You saved lives by doing so," Edward added firmly. "Perhaps," Adrian conceded, "but in military terms my actions constituted insubordination at best, mutiny at worst." Clara absorbed this revelation. "And Rowe somehow knows this." "He suspects," the Duke corrected. "He was not present at Inkerman, but has pieced together enough fragments to construct a plausible accusation. Without certain documents that remain sealed by the War Office, he cannot prove his claims, but he need not prove them to damage my reputation. Insinuation is sufficient." "And by extension, my reputation," Clara concluded. "By suggesting I possess these non-existent documents, he implies I am either blackmailing you or being courted solely to secure your secrets." The moonlight cast Adrian's features into sharp relief, emphasizing the tension in his jaw. "Precisely. A most elegant revenge. He undermines both my honor and your integrity with a single fabrication." Then we must respond with equal elegance, Clara declared, a plan forming in her mind. Not by denial, which appears defensive, but by demonstration of character so unimpeachable that his insinuations become transparently malicious. Francis smiled approvingly. Miss Whitmore, I believe you possess a strategist's mind beneath those impeccable manners. 5 years of observation yield certain insights into social warfare, Clara replied with unexpected confidence. The Duke regarded her with undisguised admiration. What demonstration do you propose? The Whitmore Foundation, she announced. My father established a small charitable trust before his passing to support veterans of the Peninsular War. It continues its work quietly, with Helena serving as trustee. I suggest we announce an expansion of its mission to include veterans of the Crimea, with your grace as patron. Edward's expression brightened. Brilliant. A public alliance between your families focused on military welfare would render Roe's insinuations not merely false, but absurd. Adrian completed the thought. Miss Whitmore, your strategic thinking is formidable. Clara felt a flush of pleasure at his approval. Helena could approach the Countess tonight regarding an announcement before the supper dance. Perfect timing, Francis agreed. When most guests are present but before anyone has departed, the Duke's eyes held Clara's, something unspoken passing between them. This extends our association beyond the parameters originally established. Are you certain? I was certain the moment you retrieved my fallen camellia, Clara replied softly. All else has merely been confirmation of that initial judgment. A discreet cough interrupted their exchange. A footman stood at the terrace entrance, bearing a silver salver with a folded note. For the Duke of Elmsworth, delivered by special messenger. Adrian accepted the note with a slight frown. Breaking the seal, he scanned its contents, his expression darkening with each line. It appears Roe has anticipated us. Lord Palmerston regrets he cannot receive me tomorrow as planned, due to urgent diplomatic matters requiring his immediate attention. Roe has friends in the Foreign Office, Edward muttered. More likely, he has embarrassing knowledge of certain officials, Adrian corrected grimly. His talent for discovering indiscretions is matched only by his skill in exploiting them. Clara's mind raced. Then we must proceed without official sanction. The announcement tonight becomes even more critical. Agreed, the Duke replied, tucking the note into his waistcoat pocket. Though I fear we enter deeper waters than I intended to draw you into, Miss Whitmore. Perhaps, Clara acknowledged, but I find I prefer the challenges of the deep to the stagnation of the shallows. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a softening, a surrender, a decision made. Then let us return to the ballroom and set our counter-strategy in motion. As they moved toward the terrace doors, Clara felt the Duke's hand briefly clasp hers, a gesture hidden from others by the fall of her skirts. The pressure of his fingers conveyed what words could not, gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that neither had yet dared to name. The ballroom awaited, its brightness intensified after the moonlit terrace. Clara stepped forward with newfound purpose, the white camellia at her breast no longer a symbol of overlooked worth, but a banner of quiet defiance. Behind them, a sealed letter lay forgotten on the stone balustrade, delivered moments after they departed by a second messenger, who found the terrace temporarily empty. The wax seal bore the insignia of the War Office, its contents destined to remain unread until fate determined otherwise. The announcement of the Whitmore Foundation's expansion was received with polite applause that barely masked the frenzy of whispers that followed. Clara stood beside the Duke at the front of the ballroom, her composure maintained through sheer determination as hundreds of calculating eyes assessed their alliance. The veterans of the Crimea deserve our unwavering support, Adrian concluded, his voice carrying effortlessly across the assembly. Miss Whitmore's family has demonstrated admirable dedication to those who served our nation. I am honored to lend my name and resources to this worthy endeavor. The Countess of Montrose, delighted to be at the center of such a significant announcement, added her personal endorsement. Such a noble collaboration. I shall be the first to contribute to this expanded mission. Who among us will join me? Several prominent guests immediately signaled their support, more from social calculation than genuine philanthropy. Clara noted with quiet satisfaction that Lord Thornfield was among them, evidently unwilling to position himself publicly against a charitable initiative for veterans, while simultaneously questioning the Duke's military honor in private. As the orchestra resumed playing, and guests dispersed to discuss this unexpected development, Helena approached with Margaret. "Masterfully executed," Helena murmured, pride evident in her voice. "Though I confess, dear niece, I might have appreciated slightly more warning before finding myself trustee of a significantly expanded foundation. Circumstances dictated improvisation," Clara replied apologetically. "The Duke will provide the necessary funds. We need only lend our family's established structure." "Oh, I'm not complaining," Helena assured her with a conspiratorial smile. "I simply wish to savor my niece's transformation from observer to strategist. Your father would be immensely proud." Margaret could barely contain her excitement. The entire room is buzzing. Lady Pembroke looks positively apoplectic with envy, and Sophia keeps glancing at you with something approaching reverence. "And Ro?" Clara inquired, careful not to look directly toward where she knew he stood. "Conversing most intently with a gentleman I don't recognize," Margaret reported. "Distinguished, military bearing, perhaps 50 years of age." The Duke, who had been speaking with Edward nearby, rejoined their group in time to hear Margaret's description. "Colonel Barrett," he identified grimly, "military correspondent for the Chronicle." Ro moves quickly to counteract our announcement. "Will it work?" Clara asked quietly. "Not immediately," Adrian replied. "Tonight's demonstration of alliance has temporarily secured the high ground, but Ro is nothing if not persistent." The next dance was announced, a quadrille that would not require the intimate proximity of a waltz. The Duke extended his hand to Clara. "Shall we reinforce our position, Miss Whitmore?" Clara accepted with a graceful curtsy. "Indeed, Your Grace, consistency in strategy is essential." As they took their positions for the dance, Clara became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The initial shock of their alliance was giving way to acceptance, even approval. The Tun, ever responsive to displays of power, was recalibrating its assessment of a woman they had long relegated to the margins. "You appear thoughtful," Adrian observed as they circled one another in the pattern of the dance. "I am contemplating the fickleness of social approval," Clara replied honestly. 5 years of impeccable behavior earned me polite indifference. One evening as your chosen companion has transformed me into someone worthy of attention." "Not transformed," he corrected gently. "Revealed. The qualities that drew me to you were always present. Society simply failed to perceive them without the lens of title and fortune to bring them into focus. The dance separated them briefly, requiring exchanges with other partners. When they rejoined, Clara continued, "An interesting metaphor, Your Grace, though I wonder, is it the lens that matters, or the willingness to look at all?" Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, appreciation, perhaps, for the philosophical turn of her mind. "A profound question. Perhaps it is both. The lens of status may focus attention, but the decision to truly see requires a different quality altogether." "And what quality might that be?" Clara inquired. "Discernment," he replied without hesitation. "The capacity to recognize value independent of its packaging." The quadrille concluded, and Adrian escorted Clara from the dance floor. As they moved toward where Helena and Margaret stood conversing with Francis Linton, their path was deliberately intercepted by Lysander Ro and Colonel Barrett. "Your Grace," Ro greeted with exaggerated deference, "what a magnanimous gesture you've made this evening. One might almost forget certain inconsistencies in your military record when confronted with such public philanthropy." Adrian's expression remained impassive. "Ro, I see you continue your practice of introducing yourself into conversations where you're neither welcome nor relevant." Colonel Barrett cleared his throat. "Duke of Elmsworth, we have not been formally introduced. Colonel James Barrett, formerly of the 33rd Regiment, now military correspondent for the Chronicle." "Sat, Colonel?" Adrian acknowledged with the barest nod. "I'm familiar with your writings on the Crimean campaign, though I find your strategic analyses frequently lack the perspective of one who actually served in the theatre of war." Barrett's face flushed slightly. "Not all battles are fought on the front lines, Your Grace. Some are waged with facts and documentation rather than swords and rifles." "Indeed," the Duke replied coolly, "though I have observed that facts filtered through secondary sources often bear only passing resemblance to reality." Clara, sensing the dangerous undercurrent in the exchange, intervened with practiced grace. "Colonel Barrett, I believe my late brother, Colonel James Whitmore, mentioned your name in his correspondence from the Crimea. He spoke highly of your attention to detail in your dispatches." Barrett's expression softened slightly at the mention of her brother. "Colonel Whitmore was an exemplary officer. His loss was keenly felt throughout the regiment. How fortunate," Ro interjected silkily, "that his sister preserves his memory, and perhaps his papers, with such devotion." The implication hung in the air like a poisoned mist. Adrian's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but Clara laid a gentle hand on his arm, a gesture not lost on their observers. "My brother's papers are indeed preserved," she replied evenly. "His letters home, his commendations, his official correspondence, all treasured for their reflection of his character, rather than their potential utility." "How virtuous," Rowe remarked with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Virtue, Mr. Rowe, is the practice of right action regardless of circumstance or advantage," Clara countered, her tone pleasant but firm, a concept that may be unfamiliar to those who measure all interactions by their potential for exploitation. A murmur of approval from several nearby guests who had edged closer to overhear the exchange made Rowe's cheeks flush with anger. "Miss Whitmore," he replied, his voice hardening, "your recent elevation in society appears to have granted you an unusual degree of confidence. One wonders how long such confidence might endure should certain realities come to light." "Enough," Adrian interrupted, his tone quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. "You have made your insinuations, Rowe. They are noted and dismissed. Miss Whitmore's character stands beyond reproach, as does the honor of her family." Barrett studied the Duke with narrowed eyes. "Strong words, Your Grace, almost as if personal sentiment has overwhelmed professional judgment. Perhaps," Adrian conceded unexpectedly, "or perhaps professional judgment has finally aligned with personal truth." He turned to Clara. "Miss Whitmore, I believe supper is about to be announced. Would you do me the honor?" With a perfect curtsy, Clara accepted his arm. "With pleasure, Your Grace." As they moved away, Rowe called after them, "Do enjoy your evening, Your Grace. Tomorrow's Chronicle may provide less pleasant reading." The threat was clear, but Clara felt an unexpected calm. The weeks of uncertainty had crystallized into something approaching clarity. Whatever storm approached, she would not face it alone. The supper room sparkled with silver and crystal, tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements that perfumed the air. As Adrian seated Clara, Edward Linton approached with unusual urgency. "A moment, if you please," he murmured, bending close to the Duke's ear. Whatever he whispered caused Adrian's expression to shift from concern to surprise. "When?" the Duke demanded quietly. "Just now," Edward replied. "Francis discovered it forgotten on the terrace. The seal is intact." Adrian turned to Clara. "You must excuse me momentarily. A matter requiring immediate attention has arisen." "Of course," she replied, though curiosity burned within her. As the Duke departed with Edward, Helena took the vacant seat beside Clara. "Intrigue upon intrigue," she observed. "One might almost believe oneself in a novel rather than a ballroom." "Indeed," Clara agreed, watching Adrian's retreating figure. "Though I find myself uncertain whether we approach the climax or merely another complication in the narrative." Helena patted her hand affectionately. "In my experience, dear niece, the true climax of any story is rarely recognized until it has already passed. It is only in reflection that we identify the moment everything changed." When Adrian returned some 15 minutes later, his countenance had transformed. The tension that had lined his features throughout the evening had given way to a strange serenity, as if a burden long carried had suddenly been lifted. "Your Grace," Clara inquired softly, as he resumed his seat beside her. "Is all well?" "Better than well, Miss Whitmore," he replied, his voice equally hushed. "The letter Edward discovered on the terrace was from Lord Raglan's adjutant. Official confirmation of my actions at Inkerman, with the War Office seal." Clara's eyes widened. "But how—" "Providence," he answered simply, "or perhaps merely the overdue arrival of truth. In either case, Rowe's threatened exposé in tomorrow's Chronicle will find itself rather definitively contradicted by official documentation." Before Clara could respond, the Countess of Montrose tapped her glass for attention. The ballroom quieted as she rose for an announcement. "My dear friends, what a magnificent evening this has been. Such delightful surprises, such notable alliances formed." Her eyes twinkled as she gazed directly at Clara and the Duke. "I have one final announcement before our celebration concludes." Clara felt a strange presentiment, a tightening in her chest, an acceleration of her pulse. "His Grace, the Duke of Elmsworth, has requested a special waltz to close our festivities," the Countess continued. "The same melody that was playing 5 years ago when, he confesses, he first noticed a certain young lady wearing a white camellia." A collective sigh rippled through the assembly as the orchestra struck up the haunting melody. Adrian rose and extended his hand to Clara. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" As Clara placed her hand in his, the ballroom seemed to recede, its myriad lights and watching eyes dimming to insignificance. For 5 years, she had observed life from its margins. Now stepping into the center of the floor on the arm of the most desired man in London, she found herself not overwhelmed, but strangely, perfectly at home. They moved together with effortless harmony, each step a silent communication. The music swelled around them, its poignant strains echoing the journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years, Adrian murmured, his lips close to her ear. 5 years I might have known the pleasure of your company, had I the courage to cross the invisible boundaries of society. Perhaps those years were necessary, Clara replied softly. Perhaps we each needed to become who we now are before we could truly see one another. The waltz carried them in sweeping circles, their forms reflected in the massive gilt mirrors that lined the ballroom. Clara caught glimpses of their reflection, the dark elegance of the Duke contrasting with her pale gown, the white camellias in her hair catching the light of 100 candles. As the music approached its conclusion, Adrian drew her subtly closer, his voice lowered for her ears alone. "Clara," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I began this association with you as an investigation. I find it has instead become a revelation." The final notes of the waltz hung in the air as they came to a stop at the center of the floor. The assembly watched, breath collectively held, as the Duke of Elmsworth gazed down at Clara Whitmore with an intensity that transcended mere social performance. "I choose you," he whispered, the words barely audible yet seeming to fill the entire universe of Clara's perception. "Not for documents or strategy or public demonstration, but for the woman of intelligence and courage I have discovered beneath the quiet observer's disguise." Clara felt the world pause on its axis, 5 years of patience crystallizing into a single, perfect moment of recognition. "And I choose you," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. "Not for title or fortune or social elevation, but for the man who finally saw what others overlooked." Around them, the ton watched in rapt attention, witnessing the transformation of a social alliance into something far more profound. Rowe stood frozen at the ballroom's edge, his machinations rendered suddenly, irrevocably futile by the patent authenticity of the scene before him. As the Duke escorted Clara from the floor, the applause began. Hesitant at first, then swelling to fill the room with its approval. The white camellia at her breast seemed to glow with inner light, no longer a symbol of overlooked worth, but a beacon of recognition finally rightfully bestowed. The clock struck midnight. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that nothing, not 5 years of invisibility, not Rowe's malice, not society's fickle judgment, would ever again diminish the woman she had become, seen, chosen, and finally, completely herself. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Whitmore drawing room, illuminating the scattered newspapers that covered every available surface. Clara sat amidst this literary deluge, her normally serene countenance betraying rare agitation as she examined the morning's publications. "Well?" Margaret demanded, unable to contain her impatience any longer. "What do they say? Is it dreadful? Is it magnificent? The suspense is truly unbearable, Clara." Clara looked up from the Chronicle, her expression caught between astonishment and disbelief. "It is neither what Rowe threatened, nor what we feared." She passed the newspaper to her sister, indicating the prominent article on the 3rd page. "Colonel Barrett's piece makes no mention of Inkerman or military misconduct. Instead, it contains a detailed account of the Duke's actions at the Battle of the Chernaya, where he apparently led a daring rescue of wounded men from both sides." Helena, who had been reading the Gazette, nodded in confirmation. This publication tells a similar tale, with quotes from surviving officers who credit the Duke with exceptional humanity in the face of brutality. There is even a statement from Lord Palmerston himself, praising His Grace's exemplary service and moral courage. "But how?" Margaret asked, perplexed. Last night, Rowe clearly intended to publish damaging allegations. "The letter," Clara surmised, her mind racing to connect the fragments. The official communication Edward discovered on the terrace must have contained more than mere confirmation of the Duke's actions. Perhaps it included commendations that Barrett could not professionally ignore, regardless of Rowe's influence. A discreet knock interrupted their speculation. The butler entered bearing a silver salver with a letter bearing the Elmsworth seal. "From His Grace, miss. The messenger awaits a reply." Clara broke the seal with steady fingers, unfolding the missive to reveal Adrian's bold handwriting. "The battle appears won before it was properly joined." Barrett, confronted with Lord Raglan's official dispatch, chose professional integrity over Roe's machinations. My military honor stands not merely intact, but enhanced through official recognition too long delayed. I shall call at 11 to discuss matters of profound importance. Until then, I remain your most devoted servant, A.V. 11, Clara noted, glancing at the mantel clock that showed 9:30. Barely enough time to compose myself after such extraordinary developments. More than time enough, Helena declared practically. Margaret, ring for Mary to prepare Miss Whitmore's blue morning dress, the one with the silver embroidery. I shall arrange for fresh flowers in the drawing room. The household erupted into controlled chaos as preparations were made for the Duke's visit. Clara retreated to her chamber, ostensibly to change her attire, but in truth to secure a moment's solitude amidst the whirlwind of events. Seated at her dressing table, she studied her reflection with newfound objectivity. The woman who gazed back at her was outwardly unchanged from the observer of 5 years' standing. The same green-grey eyes, the same composed features, the same quiet dignity. Yet something fundamental had altered, not in her appearance, but in her perception of herself. 5 years, she murmured, echoing Adrian's words from the previous night. 5 years of patience, of resignation, of acceptance. 5 years of recording life, rather than fully participating in it. The Duke arrived precisely at 11, his carriage drawing the attention of the entire street as it halted before the Whitmore residence. Clara received him in the drawing-room, Helena maintaining a discreet presence by the window seat, close enough for propriety, yet far enough for a measure of privacy. "Miss Whitmore," Adrian greeted her, bowing over her offered hand. "I trust the morning's papers have reached you?" "Indeed, Your Grace," Clara confirmed, a most unexpected turn of events. "Providence continues to intervene," he replied, his eyes conveying more than his formal words. Barrett proved himself a newsman first, and Roe's ally second. When presented with Lord Raglan's official dispatch, he recognized the greater value of truth over sensationalism. "And Mr. Roe?" Clara inquired. "How has he responded to this reversal?" A glimmer of satisfaction crossed Adrian's features. He departed for the continent on the early morning packet. His creditors, suddenly emboldened by his diminished social standing, presented their demands en masse this morning. "How fortunate their timing," Clara observed with mild skepticism. The Duke's mouth quirked in the hint of a smile. "Fortune occasionally benefits from gentle guidance. Edward has connections among the banking houses that proved most persuasive." Helena coughed discreetly from her position by the window. "I find myself suddenly recalling correspondence that requires my immediate attention. If you will excuse me, Your Grace, Miss Whitmore." With a knowing smile, she departed, leaving the door conspicuously ajar for propriety's sake. Once alone, or as alone as convention permitted, Adrian's demeanor softened. "Clara," he said, the use of her Christian name still novel enough to send a tremor through her composure. "The events of the past weeks have progressed with a rapidity that has allowed little opportunity for proper reflection or expression." "Indeed," she agreed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to conceal their slight trembling. "We have been rather occupied with matters of strategy and defense." "Precisely," he nodded, moving to sit beside her on the settee, close enough to convey intimacy while maintaining decorum. "Now that Roe's threat has been neutralized and society has witnessed our public alliance, I find myself compelled to speak of matters more personal than tactical." Clara felt her heart accelerate, though her expression remained composed. "I am listening, Your Grace." "Adrian," he corrected gently, "if what I am about to say finds favor, I believe formality between us should be permanently abandoned." Drawing a deep breath, he continued, "5 years ago I observed a woman of quiet dignity amid the chaos of social ambition. In the darkness of war that followed, the memory of that observation became a reminder of civilization's better qualities, a beacon of sorts, guiding me back to humanity when brutality threatened to extinguish it." He reached for her hand, his touch respectful, yet conveying profound emotion. "Upon my return, I found that same woman still standing apart, still observing with clear-eyed intelligence, still adorned with a white camellia that seemed to symbolize both her overlooked worth and her enduring dignity." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "I had no notion of being observed while I observed." "Therein lies the perfect symmetry," Adrian replied, his voice deepening. "We have both been watchers, cataloguing life rather than fully embracing it. Recent events have demonstrated the limitation of such an existence." From his waistcoat pocket, he withdrew a small box of polished mahogany. This morning, I visited my mother's chambers at Elmsworth House for the first time since her passing. I retrieved this, which she instructed should go only to the woman I chose with both heart and mind engaged. Opening the box, he revealed an exquisite ring, a perfect white pearl surrounded by diamonds set in platinum. Clara Whitmore, for 5 years you have watched others find love. I ask now if you will permit me to love you, not from afar as an observer, but intimately as a husband, a companion, a partner in all life circumstances. The moment stretched between them, fragile and infinite. Clara gazed at the ring, then at the man offering it, his proud features softened by vulnerability, his grey eyes revealing depths of feeling previously concealed behind careful reserve. 5 years, she said softly, is a long time to wait for recognition. Too long, he agreed, his expression solemn. Yet I would spend the next 50 years ensuring you never again stand overlooked or undervalued. Clara felt tears threatening, but they were not tears of sorrow or relief. Rather, they were the quiet acknowledgement of a journey completed, a destination reached that had once seemed impossibly distant. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion surging within. I will marry you, Adrian, not for the title or status or security, but for the man who finally saw what others overlooked. His fingers trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her hand. I choose you, he whispered, echoing his declaration from the night before. Before all others, beyond all reason, against all expectation, I choose you. The perfection of the moment was interrupted by a muffled squeal from the corridor, followed by a hasty shuffling of feet. Adrian's mouth quirked in amusement. It seems we have an audience, he observed dryly. Margaret has never mastered the art of discreet eavesdropping, Clara replied, a smile breaking through her composure. Shall we invite her in before she expires from suspense? Before Adrian could respond, the drawing-room door swung open to reveal not only Margaret, but Helena as well, both attempting and failing to appear as if they had just happened to pass by. Oh, Margaret exclaimed with theatrical surprise, we were just about to congratulate the happy couple, Helena finished smoothly, her eyes twinkling with delight. The door was ajar, and certain declarations tend to carry most effectively. Adrian rose, drawing Clara gently up beside him. Ladies Whitmore, I have asked for Clara's hand in marriage, and she has done me the profound honor of accepting. Margaret abandoned all pretense of decorum, rushing forward to embrace her sister. At last! Oh, Clara, 5 years of patience rewarded in the most splendid fashion imaginable. Helena's approach was more measured, though no less heartfelt. Your parents would be immensely proud, my dear, not of the match, illustrious though it is, but of the woman you have become, one worthy of being chosen by a man of true discernment. As congratulations flowed and plans began to form, Clara found herself watching Adrian, his interaction with her family, his genuine respect for Helena's practical wisdom, his gentle teasing of Margaret's romantic effusions. In him, she recognized not merely the Duke whose attention had transformed her social standing, but the man whose recognition had affirmed her intrinsic worth. The white camellia she wore seemed lighter now, no longer a symbol of patient endurance but of quiet triumph, the emblem of a woman who had waited, observed, and finally been seen for precisely who she was. Outside the drawing-room window, spring sunshine illuminated the London Square, where other young ladies walked with carefully calculated grace, their hopes pinned to chance encounters and favorable impressions. Clara watched them with newfound compassion, understanding now both the longing and the waiting that shaped their careful performances. 5 years of patience had taught her this. True recognition comes not from desperate seeking, but from steadfast being, from the courage to remain oneself even when that self appears invisible to the world's careless gaze. The pearl on her finger caught the light, its lustrous surface reflecting 5 years of quiet dignity, transformed at last into acknowledged worth. Autumn painted the grounds of Elmsworth Hall in shades of amber and gold, a tapestry of natural splendor that mirrored the warmth within its ancient walls. 1 year had passed since Clara Whitmore had become the Duchess of Elmsworth, a year of profound transformation, both public and private. She stood now in the Grand Library, a leather-bound journal open before her as she recorded her observations, a habit maintained not from loneliness, but from appreciation for the journey that had brought her here. The white camellia that had once adorned her bodice now grew in abundance in the estate's conservatory, cultivated with care to bloom year-round, a living reminder of patient dignity, rewarded. Still chronicling the world, my love? Adrian's voice came from the doorway, warm with affection. Clara turned with a smile that held nothing of reserve. Marriage had softened the formal Duchess into a woman whose happiness manifested in 100 small ways: the readiness of her laughter, the openness of her gaze, the ease of her movements. "Some habits prove worth preserving," she replied, setting down her pen, "though I find my perspective has shifted somewhat. I am less observer now than participant." Adrian crossed the room to stand beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of intimacy that still, after a year, caused her heart to quicken. "And what observations occupy the Duchess of Elmsworth today?" "The remarkable transformation of Lysander Rowe," she answered, gesturing to a newspaper on the desk. "According to the Chronicle, he has established himself in Vienna as a music patron of considerable influence. His past indiscretions apparently forgotten, or at least forgiven, in the artistic circles he now cultivates." "Reinvention is a powerful art," Adrian observed. "I find I can almost admire his resilience, now that he poses no threat to our happiness." Clara nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps his bitterness stemmed from the same wound that afflicts so many, the fear of being overlooked, undervalued, forgotten. "A fear you understood intimately," Adrian noted, his fingers gently caressing the nape of her neck. "Indeed," she acknowledged, "though I expressed it through withdrawal and observation, while he chose manipulation and vengeance, different symptoms of the same affliction." Their conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock. Simmons, the butler who had served 3 generations of Elmsworth dukes, entered with his usual dignified bearing. "Your Grace, the representatives from the Whitmore Foundation have arrived for the quarterly meeting. They await you in the blue drawing room, and the architect has sent the revised plans for the Veterans Hospital for your Grace's approval." "Thank you, Simmons. Inform them we shall join them momentarily," Adrian replied. As the butler departed, Clara rose from her desk, smoothing the rich fabric of her gown, no longer the modest attire of an overlooked spinster, but the elegant raiment of a woman whose confidence had blossomed alongside her social standing. "The foundation flourishes beyond all expectation," she observed as they prepared to depart the library. "Helena reports that we now support over 300 veterans and their families." "Your brother would be proud," Adrian said softly. "As am I." They walked together through the grand corridors of Elmsworth Hall, their steps synchronized through habit and harmony. Portraits of Vale ancestors gazed down upon them, stern-faced men and proud women who had carried the title through centuries of triumph and tribulation. "I received correspondence from Margaret this morning," Clara mentioned, as they descended the main staircase. "Her engagement to Lord Harwick's son proceeds satisfactorily. She credits her connection to us for elevating her prospects, though I suspect her natural charm would have prevailed regardless. Your sister possesses the remarkable quality of genuine enthusiasm," Adrian agreed with a smile, "a trait that society often undervalues until it finds itself enlivened by its presence." The blue drawing room hummed with purposeful activity as they entered. Representatives from the foundation, including several veterans who had benefited from its support, rose respectfully. Among them stood Edward and Frances Linton, whose friendship had only deepened with the passing year. "Your Graces," Edward greeted them warmly. "The quarterly reports show exceptional progress. The new housing initiative for disabled veterans has exceeded all projections." "Excellent news," Adrian replied, assuming his seat at the head of the table with Clara beside him, not behind as tradition might have dictated, but equal in position and authority. The meeting proceeded with efficiency, born of shared purpose. Clara observed her husband as he engaged with each person present, regardless of rank or status. The stern reserve that had once characterized his public persona had mellowed, revealing the compassionate intelligence that she had recognized from their earliest encounters. When the formal business concluded, Frances approached Clara with barely contained excitement. "My dear Duchess, you must share your news. The whole company is agog with anticipation." Clara glanced at Adrian, who nodded encouragingly. Rising to address the assembly, she placed a protective hand upon her abdomen, where the first subtle swelling betrayed the secret they had cherished privately for several weeks. "The Duke and I are pleased to announce that Elmsworth Hall anticipates the arrival of its next generation in the spring," she declared, her voice clear and confident. "A new life that shall embody our shared vision for the future of this estate and its responsibilities." The congratulations flowed abundantly, each person in the room connected to them, not merely through social obligation, but through genuine bonds of shared purpose and mutual respect. Later, as twilight descended over the estate, Clara and Adrian walked together through the gardens, their arms linked in comfortable intimacy. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke, a sensory reminder of time's passage. "I had a letter from the Countess of Montrose this morning," Clara mentioned, as they paused beside a stone bench carved with the Elmsworth crest. "She asks if we shall attend her midsummer ball next season." Adrian's expression grew thoughtful. "The event where I first noticed you 7 years ago now, and where you declared your choice before all of society, 2 years past," Clara added, smiling at the memory. "A fitting symmetry, indeed." He drew her closer, his hand resting protectively over hers where it covered their unborn child. "Though I fear our attendance next summer may depend upon the temperament of our newest family member. A challenge we shall navigate together," Clara assured him, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. For 5 years, Clara had observed life from its margins. Now she stood firmly at its center, not through desperate seeking, but through the quiet dignity that had eventually drawn recognition to her door. "I have been contemplating names," Adrian said suddenly, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. "If we are blessed with a daughter, I should like to call her Camellia." Clara looked up at him in surprise. "After the flower, after its significance," he corrected tenderly. "A symbol of patient worth, of beauty that requires discernment to truly appreciate, of dignity that remains constant, whether acknowledged or overlooked." Emotion tightened Clara's throat, rendering her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it carried the depth of a journey completed and a new one just beginning. "Camellia," she repeated softly. "A perfect choice, and if we are granted a son—" "James," Adrian replied without hesitation. "After your brother, whose integrity lives on through the foundation that bears your family's name." Clara nodded, profound gratitude washing over her. "You honor him well." The twilight deepened around them, transforming the familiar landscape of Elmsworth into a dreamscape of shadow and silver. In the distance, lights glowed from the windows of the hospital under construction, a beacon of hope for those whose service had exacted physical and emotional tolls. "I once feared being forgotten," Clara confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 years of watching others find love while remaining unseen myself. It created a particular kind of resignation that I mistook for contentment." Adrian's arms tightened around her, "And now I understand that being truly seen, not for title or beauty or fortune, but for one's essential self, is a rarity, precious beyond measure." She turned in his embrace to face him directly. "You gave me that gift, Adrian, not merely recognition, but the recognition of worth." "You had always possessed worth," he countered gently. "I merely had the good fortune to recognize it when others failed to look deeply enough." A soft breeze rustled the autumn leaves, carrying the distant sound of the estate's clock tower striking the hour. Clara thought of the journals that chronicled her journey from invisible observer to woman fully known and cherished, volumes that would one day perhaps offer insight to the daughter they might name Camellia. "5 years I waited," she murmured, "never knowing that you had noticed me from the beginning." "And a lifetime we have now," Adrian replied, "to ensure neither of us stands overlooked again." As darkness settled fully over Elmsworth Hall, they made their way back toward the warm lights of home. Clara's hand rested upon her abdomen, where new life grew as testament to love finally found and fully embraced. The white camellia she had worn as silent emblem of overlooked worth had transformed, like herself, into something recognized, celebrated, and ultimately perfectly complete. In the night sky above, stars appeared one by one, each invisible until precisely the right moment of darkness, when their light could finally be perceived. Clara gazed upward, understanding at last that visibility was not a gift bestowed by others, but a quality inherent to the self, requiring only the right observer to recognize its brilliance. For 5 years, she had waited, watched, and endured. For a lifetime, she would be seen, known, and cherished. The difference lay not in her essential nature, which had remained constant throughout, but in the eyes that had finally learned to see beyond society's narrow definitions of value, eyes that had looked upon a woman standing quietly apart and whispered, with perfect clarity, "I choose you." And in that choice, both the chooser and the chosen had found their truest selves at last. In the quiet corners of life, overlooked by hurried gazes, true worth patiently awaits recognition. Clara's journey reminds us that our value does not diminish when others fail to see it, nor does it increase when suddenly acknowledged. Like the white camellia she wore, modest, yet perfect in form, our dignity remains constant whether celebrated or ignored. The world rushes to notice the brightest blooms, the loudest voices, the most dramatic gestures. But sometimes, the most profound connections form when we learn to see what others have overlooked, to recognize the quiet strength in patient endurance, to value what persists unchanged through seasons of neglect. Perhaps you, like Clara, have stood in shadows while others danced in light. Remember this: the right eyes will find you, the right heart will recognize you, the right voice will someday whisper, "I choose you," not for what you might become, but for who you have always been. Until then, wear your white camellia with pride. Stand in quiet dignity. Your worth is inherent, not assigned. Your story is being written even in seasons of waiting. And when recognition finally arrives, you will find it was never about being transformed, but simply finally being seen. Did this story touch your heart? Subscribe for more tales of dignified love and patient hearts rewarded. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt overlooked like Clara? Or have you been the one to recognize value others missed? Your story matters just as much as hers.